Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're about to get started. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Marcia Gaffin, and I am the volunteer head of congregational care here at Leavenworth First Methodist Church. I'd like to welcome you today. For those of you who are not members, if you need to get up at any time, please feel free to get refreshments. If you go through those double doors and turn either left or right, look at Pastor Dave back there. There are restrooms. And if you need anything at all while the seminar is going on, just raise your hand and I'll be looking for you. Thank you. I'd like to open with a quick word of prayer. Heavenly and gracious Father, we are so thankful to be here because we want to be good stewards. And one of those ways is to plan for what happens when we are gone, because we do not want to leave a burden to those who follow behind us. Help us to hear and to assimilate what we need to know today. And we thank you for this wonderful turnout and this time for fellowship. In Jesus' name, amen. Our first speaker today is Mike Crow. Mike has been an attorney here in Leavenworth for 50 years, and he specializes in wills and trusts. So he's going to talk about that, and then we will have a little bit of time at the end for questions.
Thank you, Marcia, and first off, thank Marcia and her team for putting on such a good program and for you all coming out to attend. At the table, and we have extra copies over here with my wife Marty of the outline that I've prepared, and this is an updated version. Is the sound coming okay, or? Okay. This is an updated version of a program I gave here back in 2020. And our idea today is not to focus on all of those things, but rather the emphasis is on the end of life preparation. And this, of course, gets into personal decisions and things that can be done ahead of time to have your ability to the best as the law allows concerning what you want to happen at the end of your life as far as medical treatment and other legal matters. I would point out that on page 2 of the outline, there is a summary in the next several pages about what would be considered a basic estate planning document. That would be a will, a durable power of attorney for finances, a durable power of attorney for health care, an authorization to comply with HIPAA requirements of Medicare, and then a living will. But to get started, let's focus on truly the end of life matters, and that is the living will and what you can do to direct how you want the end of your life, the procedure you want. And first off, an apology. Lawyers generally deal with the negatives. Nobody comes see a lawyer happy. And so those negatives are when things aren't going the way you might want, and it could be other people involved in your family that one has a different view than another, and how the law can help resolve those conflicts. But each of you, I imagine, have had a family member who has faced these decisions, and you as a family member have also faced the decisions and what happens. And I'll tell the story about my own situation where my father died in 1973. It was my final year in law school, my senior year in law school, and he was at St. Luke's Hospital with lung cancer in Kansas City. And the doctors came into me, and it was severe lung cancer, and they don't have the treatments back then. And the doctor said, well, we don't know if we can do anything more for your father, but we need your authority to stop giving treatment. And I was young. Before law school, I had gotten hurt pretty bad in Vietnam. And I said, pull out the stops. Who knows? Miracles happen. And the doctor said, okay. And then 2 hours later, he died. And then later, the doctor and I were talking. And he said, I spoke with your dad several days before his death. And he said, I know you have to ask Mike if you should continue trying to keep me alive, even though you don't think I can stay alive. And I know what he'll say, and I'm telling you, don't do what he says. And so he died peacefully several hours after they talked to me. There were no DNRs, there were no living wills or anything like that. Now, when my mother passed away in 2010, just shy of 101 years old, she died peacefully. She was transferred from the nursing home back to her house, and she died peacefully with hospice there and the way she wanted. And a lot has happened over those years from 1973 to 2010, and certainly more now, especially what can medically be done to keep you alive. And quite frankly, they can keep you artificially alive, even though there's no hope for a considerable period of time. So the law is trying to catch up a little bit with medicine on what can be done. Now, the most basic thing is, and this is under Kansas law, is a living will. And it is statutory. Kansas statutes, and this is on the back, I'll give you the page number, the format, straight out of Kansas statute book. It's page 9 of the 10, and then I had some additions. And it says that while you're fully competent, you are stating that if I have an incurable injury, disease, or illness certified to be terminal by 2 physicians who have personally examined me, one of whom shall be my attending physician if possible, and they have determined that my death will occur whether life-sustaining procedures are utilized or where the application of life-sustaining procedures would serve only to artificially prolong the dying process, I direct that the procedures be withheld. And Kansas law requires there be 2 witnesses, and oftentimes there's also a notary on there. And that is the most basic in general and all-encompassing thing that you could do. You can have other things such as do not resuscitate, but this is really the key. And most of the time, that would be coming up in a hospitalization situation. Or it could be you've been in the hospital and you're being transferred to home, like my mother was, for hospice and palliative care, and the doctors in the hospital make that decision before you come home. Or it could be, but not, unfortunately it doesn't happen as often as it should, it could be made at a nursing home. But sometimes there's a lag there where it's not accomplished. But this would be the basic ingredient. Now, the next question is, obviously, the healthcare provider, that be a hospital, nursing home, or whatever, would need a copy of this. And if you don't have one, oftentimes you'll be able to sign one, in the hospital or in the nursing home. But it has to be signed while you're competent. But that's the basic one. Then let's go a step further. And that is durable power of attorneys. And on the very last page, I have an example of the typical durable power of attorney for health care. And you will see on that page what is there at the bottom. It says, decisions concerning artificial life support, medical treatment, surgery, and other medical procedures. In other words, the principal, that is the person, the patient, signing this durable power of attorney for health care is directing that their agent, or sometimes called their attorney in fact, has authority to take care of medical treatment if you're unable to make those decisions. Now, as long as you're able to do that, then it doesn't come into play. But let's say someone would have a stroke, they're taken by EMS to the hospital, they're in a coma or whatever, they can't admit themselves, so the agent has authority to sign the admission papers, also to consent to surgery, and it also says make decisions concerning artificial life support. Well, wait a minute. That conflicts with the living will. And I believe that the way it is universally interpreted is that the living will overrides the DPOA for medical. And so, for instance, one of your children could be named your spouse usually, but if your spouse is predeceased, one of your children would probably be your healthcare agent. And what about they say, well, I get to make decisions concerning artificial life support, and I don't want it stopped. Well, I think the living will, the Kansas statutory format, would take precedent in that case. Now, the abbreviation for durable power of attorneys is DPOA. The key is durable. That means that, for instance, in healthcare, but it also applies a different DPOA for finances, means it survives even if you're declared incapacitated, incompetent. So it would still be in effect. It's durable. So, for instance, used to be that you would have to have a guardian appointed for that person and over their person, and a conservatorship over that for the finances. But the durable power of attorney saves that expense and is effective upon two doctors saying you're incapacitated. Well, it's as far as a healthcare one, it goes into effect immediately. And you're talking about, you could be talking about $2,500 under our procedures in Kansas for a guardianship and conservatorship. So, and that would include the expenses, and also the appointment of a lawyer as a guardian ad litem and other things at a court hearing. So the durable part is very important for medical and also for finances. Now let's talk a little bit about problem areas, and that would be the DNR, do not resuscitate. And Kansas has a specific statute on it, but the statutory one concerns decisions to limit emergency care, and this is one of the attachments. Page would be 10. I don't think it says 10 on the bottom, but at the back of your packet. And this simply says that you are refusing treatment If my heart stops beating or if I stop breathing, no medical procedures to restart breathing or heart functioning will be instituted. No resuscitation will be attempted. Now that's pretty darn specific language, and I can certainly imagine a number of times when probably the patient, probably the person signing this, would not want that, or family members would not want it. So it is something that needs to be taken very careful thought to. And let's take the situation where someone is at home and their spouse is living there, and the ill person has signed this DNRA, and it is posted with a magnet on the refrigerator and possibly in the bedroom. And the husband sees the spouse, or the wife in this case, in bad situation, but not as bad as heart stopping or stopping breathing, calls the EMS, and by the time EMS gets there, they're not breathing. What do you do? And this person, while fully competent, the ill person has stated what they want, and that would not be overridden by the spouse or someone else saying, do not resuscitate. But at the same time, the ill person wants to relieve the family members from making decisions such as that. So it's a careful balance, but it takes time, considerable thought. Now, this DNR that I'm speaking of is emergency medical care, usually arriving with EMS, coming to home, I guess, or wherever, and EMS knows about the DNR. And of course, they might not see it till they get there and see it on the refrigerator door in the bedroom. But these are decisions you have to take a lot of care of. Now, one thing I want to emphasize is, as long as the patient is competent, they can revoke the living will or the DNR completely. In fact, the law kind of indicates even if they're incompetent, they can override it as long as they say that. So and the same would be true of a healthcare power of attorney. So you would always have the opportunity to change your mind, or it could be EMS is there and you're conscious enough that you can somehow or another communicate to them that you do want treatment, then I'm sure that they would provide that treatment. So those are big decisions, and you can see some conflicts. And like I say, in my practice, I usually deal with the estate plan, putting it together, but when it really comes up in an emergency, that's when people contact the lawyer to find out what to do at that stage. And as you can imagine, what happens if there's a DNR, the person has been in a nursing home and is brought home basically to die, but they don't have a living will, or they don't have the statements of the two doctors that, it's the end and nothing can be done. And hospice is there, and the person is dying naturally, and everybody knows that. And the one of, say, 3 children says, do whatever you can to keep her alive. Don't let her pass away. Don't die. And if EMS came and there is a DNR on the refrigerator door, then that would take care of that situation. They'd let them die naturally. And I think that's what everybody, just like my mother at almost 101, wanted to die under those circumstances. But these are really thoughtful things. You should definitely discuss it with your spouse. And these decisions have to be made, and these legal documents have to be signed while you're fully competent. But at the same time, as long as you're capable, and even if you're hallucinating, if you say no, then no's no. You can revoke it at the last minute. Next thing I'd like to talk about, just for a few minutes, is another very confusing area of the law, and this is something that is handled toward the end of the life, and that is transfer on death deeds. And the law changed in effective July 1st of 2023, just 9 months ago. And you will see on the attachments where I've put in page 8 how these statutes have changed. Now, the problem with this from a legal perspective is that mixes real estate law and probate law. In other words, this statute, KSA 593504, only concerns transfers on death of real estate. And we sometimes call this the poor man's trust, because a lot of times, the most valuable asset, not to a specific beneficiary, is the home. And it transfers on death to the grantee who you name as a beneficiary. Now, if the husband and wife are alive at the time of executing this, often it will say, John and Sally Smith, husband and wife, transfer on the death of the second one of them to die to our 3 children, and names the children. And there was a case in Dickinson County where one of those 3 children predeceased the mother and father. Okay, what happens in that case? Well, under the old law, it lapsed, even though just one of them passed away, because the statute at that time specifically says that if the beneficiary, if the grantee, the children predecease, it lapses. There it is. And so the legislature, and as Marty well knows from the legislature, oftentimes laws are made to apply to all of us over one county having one problem, one person. And so the law was changed when the transfer on death deed was not made contingent on the grantee beneficiaries surviving the record owner and the deceased grantee beneficiary leaves at least one surviving issue, that is children or grandchildren, upon the death of the owner, such interests which would have otherwise lapsed does not, and goes to that predeceasing beneficiary, their issue, their children. Boy, that's talking like a lawyer. You got to be a Philadelphia lawyer to interpret that. But that is the idea. The general rule is that it would lapse, but in this case it would not. Now, before this new law went into effect, what I always put was if the three children, after each name, I would put per stirpes, and that means that it would go to that person's children if one predeceased. But this makes it statutory. And the problem with the old law was that it needed to, to specify that it would go per stirpes, and that's what happens under the new law. It works real good with a situation where it's the parents concerning the home or the surviving parent concerning the home transferring on death in equal shares to the children. And then now the law says if one of those three children predeceases, it doesn't go to the other two. It doesn't void the transfer on death deed, but rather that predeceasing child's share, that 1/3, goes to their children. However, under the old law, I had to give a deposition Wednesday on a situation where there's a transfer on death deed to a non-relative, and it was really kind of part of a business transaction, I believe. It was a TOD, and it was just this named person, and that person predeceased, and according to law, it lapsed. Now, other important things about transfer on death deeds is it has to be recorded with the Register of Deeds prior to the death of the grantor. It has to be. I had a case where I went to an individual's home, and I had known them forever, and he was in extremely bad shape. And he wanted a TOD. He was confident. He signed it. I brought a notary with me, and I was driving back, and he was here in Leavenworth. It wasn't that far from my office. And I said, I better go up right now and record this. And I did, and he died about 10 minutes after I recorded it. So you've got to get it. And I have another case. Boy, I talk about. I had another case where there were properly filled out transfer on death deeds that they got from the Register of Deeds, but they hadn't been recorded, so they were void. Why is that true? Well, because the owner, the grantor, continues to own the property until that grantor dies. So the beneficiary, the grantee, doesn't own anything until that person dies. So if they predecease, then it lapses. This new law kind of makes sense of if there's several beneficiaries or grantees and one of them predeceases, it doesn't lapse the whole thing. Now, let's go back. How am I doing on time? One thing I forgot to say about the DNR, the do not resuscitate. Okay, this law states that it must be in writing, signed by the person making the declaration, or by another person in the presence of the declarant, dated and signed in the presence of a witness. Now, unlike the living will, it's not two witnesses. It's one witness. And the law goes on to say, of course, that person has to be over 18. And interestingly, and this is getting pretty specific, and the witness shall not be the person who signed the declaration on behalf of the declarant, related to the declarant by blood or marriage, entitled to any portion of the estate of the declarant according to the laws of intestate succession, or under any will, or directly financially responsible for declarant's medical care. Boy, we got a lot of legal cases there. Of course, that means that for the DNR to be signed, you can't have the husband or one of the kids be the witness. Just that simple. I presume that the reason they can't have any financial responsibility was they might stop everything because they have a financial gain to make. And also, under a will or intestate succession, they would be getting something when that person passes away. But these are a couple of things to kind of focus on right now. And I believe that Kansas law provides most people with how to get to where they feel they need to get without too great of an expense. Now, back real quick to the transfer on death deed. A will does not trump a transfer on death deed. A will does not trump the TOD. The TOD trumps the will. And that means that you have a will that leaves everything to one person, but you have a transfer on death deed that was recorded prior to death with the register of deeds for a piece of real estate. It does not go by will. It goes by the transfer on death deed, unless the grantee or beneficiary of the transfer on death deed predeceases and there's not other beneficiaries. Now, if there's just, in other words, you have to opt out of the lapse now if there's more than one grantee. Yes? Sure.
What about, like, if you have a bunch of IRAs and insurance policies and stuff, do you put those in your will?
No, usually, and
Could you restate the question?
yes, I'm sorry. Very good. The question is, what happens with IRAs or life insurance? Because generally the will would say, everything that I got goes to these people. However, and the easiest example is life insurance. Well, life insurance is simply a contract between you and the life insurance company that when you pass away, the policy proceeds go to whoever you name. So it's not part of probate. It's not covered by the will. It's a contract between the insured, you, and the insurance company. So it does not. The next thing is IRAs. And that would not be, generally that would not be covered because IRAs would have a beneficiary. Now, if there's no one named as the beneficiary in an IRA, then the proceeds would go by will to the estate. Or if the primary beneficiary on the IRA predeceases and no one else is named as a secondary beneficiary, then it would go to the estate by will. Generally speaking, we're hesitant to put IRAs into the estate because it would trigger probate. And we're also hesitant on naming a revocable trust as a beneficiary because there can be benefits depending on the relationship in an IRA to stretch out the payments so it's not all taxable at one time. And so those are concerns. Now, actually, the IRS is now pretty well recognizing the 10-year withdrawal part of a spouse. But those are the general rules. Real quick, any other questions? Yes, ma'am. Clay.
It's common belief among hospital personnel that a DNR is suspended for a certain period of time if you have an operation. Because obviously if they give you enough anesthesia, you're going to stop breathing.
Yeah.
Can you comment on what the duration of that is?
Well, of course, the Kansas statute concerns pretty much EMS, emergency care, where they're coming to the home. In the hospital setting, I believe that would be under medical. I think the physicians would make those decisions. And it would not trigger the DNR coming into effect. Now, I'll pick on Dr. McAllister real quick. I did hear one comment fairly recently that concerning the Kansas living will, this person had heard that some physicians are too quick to say the person, nothing can be done for that person. And they were worried about two doctors in a living will saying they were terminal and nothing could be done when in fact that wasn't the case. I know of no example of that. In fact, to the contrary, I think docs are very careful about those type of situations. And we still see in the living will situation, people coming in living will. Liz and I were talking, and years ago, I was on the medical ethics committee at our VA. And that committee was charged with, a lot of times, especially in the old DOMs, the domiciliaries, there were people who were there that came there without any family. Nobody had any indication of where family members were, and they were terminal. And but there was no living will. And what do? Well, if you pull out of the stops, that person could physically suffer while you're doing that. In addition, their life could be prolonged artificially for months and months. And so this committee, we would meet, I believe Liz has been there on that committee too. At least when I was on it years ago, the treating physicians would come before us, and we would examine it and make a decision where do artificial means just continue indefinitely? And also on the committee was a Catholic priest and a VA social worker, and can't remember right now who else was on it. And we always reach a consensus. We always reach a consensus. Living will takes that away. I mean, if you don't have the living will, you're really putting things in a difficult position. It's one page, not much else. I have got to say, give careful thought to the DNR. You know, give careful thought to the DNR. I think it can work in almost all cases, but there can be some cases where it doesn't. Same thing goes for that transfer on death deed. It can work well in some cases as an estate planning tool, but in other cases it may not. And the one true saying in estate planning is, know where you're going to land before you jump. You want to know what the end result will be and handle those situations as best you can. Any other questions, Roka? Hey, I got off pretty light. I would urge you to take. There should be enough of these packets to take with you, and also I have what I think would be considered a living will that has been for Catholics, that has been approved by the Archdiocese of Kansas. You can take one of those. They basically do the same thing. Yes, ma'am.
What's your problem with trust? Do you have a problem with trust?
No. Trust, okay, real quick. Trust, it depends. Well, first off, the key to a revocable living trust is you get everything you own that has a title to it into the trust. Marty and I have a trust, and our checking accounts are in the trust. All the real estate, everything that has a title to it is in the trust. Why? Because you skip probate if everything with a title is in the trust. There's nothing to probate. Sometimes you can handle the situation, though, with transfer on death deeds and named beneficiaries. So, but trusts are good. They skip probate. Probate, another thing about probate is it's public knowledge. You can go down and look at anybody's, it's a court filing. Now, there's always a pour over will that pours over everything that you might have missed that has a title into the trust, but that requires some sort of legal proceeding. One other quick thing, if we've got a second. Okay, one other quick thing is Kansas, like I say, is very progressive. I mean, it's not a bad system at all. If there are some things that are could be missed and their total value is less than $75,000, used to be $50,000, July 1st, 2023 went to $75,000, you can transfer that with what we call a small estates affidavit. Problem is, it's Kansas, and I've run into problems with, in particular, computer share on, stock and stuff like that. That is problematic because they don't have to honor it. The next thing is things that have a title or could be problematic. There could be little things. For instance, we have our home insurance with Armed Forces Insurance, but our vehicle insurance with USAA. And I had a heck of a time getting my subscriber's account transferred into the trust. You can do that. What their provisions are is the insured, which is the military person, usually, let's just say it's the man, the husband, it provides that it goes to the spouse upon death of the husband, of the member of USAA. But what about that spouse predeceases, or the spouse owns it and then she passes away? Well, that subscriber account maybe could be handled by the small estates affidavit. It's usually not that big of money, but that is a problem. You got to think of everything that's got a title and try to get it into the trust. Well, thank you very much.
So table over here. If I stand right here, can you see the screen?
Our next speaker is Dave York. He's trying to steal the microphone. He doesn't want me to have my moment.
You know how it is with the preacher. God, don't
Dave has been our pastor he's working on his 5th year here.
6th year.
Oh, excuse me, 6th year. Time flies. My goodness. And he is going to talk to us about some very personal things, planning our funeral and writing our own obituaries.
Well, in preparation for this talk, I was thinking through, this can be a very morbid, kind of ghoulish talk in a way, right? You're thinking about, well, when I die. And here's my first thought on that. If everything we talked about happened just when we talk about it, you'd all be lottery winners. It's just talking about something doesn't make it happen, right? So always keep that in mind. That's preparation. So I'm so pleased we're able to serve your families well with bringing up the topic. Even if you start the topic with, well, I was at a church the other day and they were talking about writing your obituary and funeral and things like that, and at least you've got an open door to talk to somebody about it, whether it's a family member or elderly parents or children or whoever, So I thought that was good. There's also a reality of being a truth teller. There will come a day when we will all die. That's the way it is. That's the order of life. So there's a humility that comes with, I want to live my life well, in good relationship with God and others, but I also know that one of these days it's going to come to an end. And so I want to be prepared for that. I believe planning all of these kinds of things we're talking about today is a real gift to the people that you leave behind. If you've planned your service, if you've planned your estate well, if you've taken care of your advance directives and things like that, you've already made choices about your life and how you want the last chapter of your life to go. And so then all you have to do is hand off the plan to your survivors and say, this is what I want, follow the plan. And they don't have to make really hard decisions, or they don't have to fight over who gets what or those kinds of things. They don't have to fight about where the funeral's gonna be or any of that stuff. You've already decided. My personal take on it is your life is your responsibility. God gave you your life. He didn't give it to your children or your spouse or whoever it is. So you make those decisions with input from others and advice and suggestions and things like that. So when I'm gone, this is what I'd like to have you do for me and as part of it. Having a good funeral is really important. And so I'm going to save that for the second half. I want to start off really with thinking about your obituary and your eulogy. And I'm going to use a secular author here. Stephen Covey has passed away now, but back in the day, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People was a really popular leadership type of book. And one of the chapters in it is called Begin with the End in Mind. So like Mike was saying, you want to know where you're going to land before you jump, right? So it's a way of thinking through your life. At the end of my life, what do I want it to be like? So I want to live that way. And I wanted to read a passage out of his book. It's in the introduction. It's just a few paragraphs. Covey wrote this. He says, focus with me and really open your mind. So use your imagination. In your mind's eye, see yourself going to the funeral of a loved one. Picture yourself driving to the funeral parlor or chapel, parking the car and getting out. As you walk inside the building, you notice the flowers, the soft organ music. You see the faces of friends and family you pass along the way. You feel the shared sorrow of losing, the joy of having known that radiates from the hearts of the people there. As you walk down to the front of the room and look inside the casket, you suddenly come face to face with yourself. This is your funeral 3 years from today. All these people have come to honor you, to express feelings of love and appreciation for your life. As you take a seat and wait for the services to begin, you look at the program in your hand. There are to be 4 speakers. The first is from your family, immediate and also extended, children, brothers, sisters, nephews, nieces, aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents who have come from all over the country to attend. The second speaker is one of your friends, someone who can give a sense of what you were as a person. The third speaker is from your work or profession. And the fourth is from your church or community organization where you've been involved in service. Now think deeply. What would you like each of these speakers to say about you and your life? What kind of husband, wife, father, or mother would you like their words to reflect? What kind of son or daughter or cousin? What kind of friend? What kind of working associate? What character would you like them to have seen in you? What contributions, what achievements would you want them to remember? Look carefully at the people around you. What difference would you like to have made in their lives? So I believe that a eulogy is saying a good word about someone. That's the point of it. And you've all been to services where somebody comes up and does that. An obituary is about more your accomplishments, what you've done in your life. So take a few moments, just maybe on the back of your handout there, the handout looks like this, or just scratch it in the margins of your paper. Just take a minute, say, and what would you like to have said about you, right? What kind of person are you, or are you becoming? I'm not there yet, but I'm working on it, right? Just jot those things down, and then we'll move on. So along that same line, a popular writer now, he's on PBS. His name's David Brooks. He did a TED Talk on the difference between resume and eulogy virtues. So here's the talk. It's about 5 minutes.
Thinking about the difference between resume virtues.
I couldn't resist, right?
I mean, every time I watch that, it's like, wow. You pull something new out of it. It's David Brooks. It's on TED Talk. I think it's eulogy virtues or something like that. For those of you who watch PBS, he's an expert on PBS that comes in and talks about national and world affairs. So he's really done. So if you think about your eulogy is what will they say about me? And it's really more of these kinds of personal qualities. I figured it out the other day. I've done almost 120 funerals in my ministry time, memorial services, that kind of thing. Very rarely does somebody come up and read off the list of accomplishments the person has. You might print that in the obit, they went to school here, they did these things, they owned this or had that, or, achievements, accolades, accomplishments, all those kinds of virtues. They're important. I mean, you spend a lot of your life earning those and striving for those. But after a person passes away, it's very rare that somebody says, and they were a great CEO of the company. They talk about what kind of integrity they had, kindness, love, integrity, what a friend they were because they were loyal and devoted to their family and those kinds of things. So I think as you consider, if I was at my own funeral, what would I want them to say about me? My suggestion for you is this. Live that way. Make it so obvious that you are a great lover of people. Make it so obvious to them that you are kind, that you care about others. Make it so obvious to them that every person in the room would go, well, of course. Boy, do I have a story to tell you about that. You remember that one time? And of course, those always lead to great stories because that's the evidence. That's the proof. If they're not sure, if you were really a generous person, you probably weren't, or not as much maybe as you could have been, because they just, eliminate all doubt on those kinds of things. So my homework for you, and you always have to give homework. I'm a former school teacher. I know people who have written their own obituaries. As a person who is aging in life and who has a 24-year-old, I have to remind him, your mom and I had a life before you came aboard. I didn't know you did that. It's like, I did that when I was 20-something years old. I don't go back to those days very often, right? I can't even remember a lot of that stuff anymore. But when you sit and think about it, you do write these things down. You do say, well, I did these things, and they'll go, wow, I never knew you did that. It's like, well, that was a long time ago. That was, several chapters ago in my whole life. They only know you from a certain time in your life when you were this person. That's not who I was 30 years ago or 40 years ago, or it's not who I am today. It's just different. Your life changes. Your life has chapters to it. So some of those chapters, you can go back and reread them. You can't live there, but it's nice to remember. And it's nice to remind yourself of what you've accomplished. I think writing your own obituary is a great form of gratitude, because as you look back on your life and you do see the things you've accomplished and the things you are proud of, it's like I've had some things that I think are worthy of mentioning, at least for somebody to remember. I think you can be very grateful for the gifts you have, the abilities you've been given, the time, the sacrifices other people made. We should probably do that more often. Think about your life. Where have I been? Who's been with me along the way? Who was there in those days? Grateful people end well. Grateful people end well, because they don't end with bitterness and resentment and anger, and that can happen along the way because you accumulate some of those things. But grateful people end with, I've had such a great life. It hasn't all been good. They're truth tellers. But on the whole, what a blessed life I've had. God's been with me all the days of my life, right? So I think this is good practice for a lot of people. The resume, virtues, what did you do? Accomplishments, achievements, accolades, lay it out there. The resume, virtues, this is who I am. Usually they talk about those things. A listing of your family. I know for me, I found out by reading some obituaries that my mom had collected of her grandparents, because she was alive when her great-grandparents lived. She kept the obituaries. I found out things about what would be now my great-great-grandparents that I would have never known without reading the obituary, because it's had preceded in death by its history. Yeah, it's history of your family. And I found out that my great-great-grandparents on my mom's side are buried here in Leavenworth. They're out at Mount Muncie. I just saw the tombstone the other day when I was out there doing a service. I wouldn't have known that if I wouldn't have read an obituary about her grandparents, because they listed the family. So it's a good thing. So here's your homework. Write your own obituary, even if it's just a rough draft. You'll want to add to it and change it and those kinds of things. It gives you a chance to live your life well. Live your life so that when the day comes, no one will question. I mean, you could pick anybody out of the crowd to say, well, what did you think about Dave? And they say, oh, here are your qualities. And they won't say, oh, he did these things too. It's like, because that won't matter as much. And then I encourage you to speak to your spouse, your kids, your family, your associates, your colleagues. If you know that about somebody, if I said, hey, would you do my obituary for me and do my eulogy? Tell them those kinds of things today. You don't have to wait until they die to tell them what a wonderful person they are, of what I really admire about you and respect about you. And, you've always shown this quality. You've taught me a lot just by being you, and I've learned how to become more, whatever the quality is, more generous, more faithful, more loving, more devoted, a hard worker. Those are the things that you usually hear about. Like, I get to hear a lot of stories. I meet with families. I never met the person who passed away. I'm just doing their service. So one of the things I like to ask them is, well, tell me about the person who passed away. What were they like? What do you admire about them? What makes you smile when you think about them? Those kinds of questions. And, sometimes I leave the meeting going, I wish I would have known that person. What a terrific person. And that it didn't sync up for us, this side of eternity. So tell them now, why do we wait until they're gone to say a good word about them? Don't you like appreciation and respect and gratitude for who you are and, sometimes what you've done, but more who you are. Just you're that kind of person. So I think our lives would be better with that. I want to read a little poem to you. If you've done this before, it's worth repeating. It's on the inside page of your packet. It's just turn the front cover and you'll have it. It's called The Dash. Do any of you know The Dash? Do you know this work? So if you don't know it, it's great. If you've heard it before, it's like, oh, I love The Dash. So here's The Dash by Linda Ellis. I read of a man who stood to speak at the funeral of a friend. He referred to the dates on the tombstone from the beginning to the end. He noted that first came the date of birth and spoke the following date with tears. But he said what matters most of all was the dash between those years. For that dash represents all the time that they had spent alive on earth. And now only those who love them know what that little line is worth. For it matters not how much we own, the cars, the house, the cash. What matters is how we live and love and how we spend our dash. So think about this long and hard. Are there things you'd like to change? For you never know how much time is left that can still be rearranged. If we could just slow down enough to consider what's true and real and always try to understand the way other people feel, and be less quick to anger and show appreciation more, and love the people in our lives like we've never loved before. If we treat each other with respect and more often wear a smile, remembering this little dash might only last a little while. So when your eulogy is being read with your life's actions to be rehashed, would you be proud of the things they say about how you spent your dash? So some things to consider. So a show of hands here, because I'm just around the audience. Shifting gears here to memorial service, funeral service. Just quick show of hands. How many of you have made arrangements in the past for someone who's passed away? Just a quick show of hands. Okay? I was telling Kristen up here, at a certain season of life, when your parents have passed away, you've probably done that. And if your parents haven't passed away, it may be somebody else, a sibling, or it's just somebody along the way. So some of this won't be new to you. It'll be like, well, yeah, I remember doing that. So here's what I like to do. Just take a minute or two, and the people at your table, say the names of the people that you did arrangements for, right? It was my so-and-so, his name was, or her name was, and just do that, and we'll do that, just at your table. And if you're sitting next to somebody you know who knows what you're gonna say, pick the person on the other side who may not know you as well, all right? So just take a minute or so. 10 seconds. All right, I'll call you back to order here. So one of the things we learned during COVID, I'll take you back to recent history, when we couldn't meet together to have services. I don't know if you remember that. Only 10 people could be at the funeral home or the church, and that included the funeral home director, the pastor. So, it's like, who in my family are you going to leave out? You're going to leave out, is it only the children because you had a big family? Or is it which grandkid isn't going to come? It's like RSVPing where you get a +1. That's it. It just didn't help. And then people were just left there. It's like, well, what do we do? I mean, we need to do something, but because a good funeral is really important. We use the old cliche, funerals are for the living. That's true. I mean, if your loved one who passed away was a person of faith, you shouldn't, you'll mourn them because you miss them, but don't mourn them because of where they're going. They're better off now than they've ever been, so that's a good thing, right? But we miss them. So the funeral's for us, the service is for us. We want to celebrate them. We want to acknowledge with joy and sorrow. Our tears say a lot about how much we love somebody, so never be ashamed of that kind of thing. It says a lot. Your body language says a lot in those kinds of days. In our society, we've gone almost so far to the idea of we want to celebrate life that we don't want to acknowledge the sorrow and the grief and the sadness that comes along with it. So I think a really good service is a balance of both. Good memories, sweet histories, those kinds of things, but also an acknowledgement of where we are at now, and also an acknowledgement of God has a lot to say about life and death and life after death. So if they're a religious person, I'm assuming a lot of you are. Well, I know a lot of you, so I hope so. God has something to say about that, and that's part of like the pastor's role or those kinds of things. Grief, when you experience, also will churn up other grief that you've had, memories of people who have passed on or people you miss. And so that's a natural thing too. So it's good to kind of remember them. I see people like in a nice springtime service when you go out to the cemetery, they'll linger for a while. They'll walk around and they'll point out to the grandkids, it's like, well, this is where my grandfather was born. And they'll go, man, he was really old, because they can do the math. That's important. It brings families together that way. It's a good thing. And the conditions that a person dies in makes a huge difference in the style of service, the mood of the service. So let me just give you some general examples. So the death of an elderly person whose time had come. It was just her time. Lived a really long life. Okay, that happens. The death of a child. I can't imagine something worse than that. And I know some of you have probably experienced it with just the numbers we have. If you do the numbers, I'm sure that's somebody's experience. A baby, yeah. The death of a person who had a sudden death or a shocking death. They walked through the front door, had a massive stroke or a massive aneurysm or a heart attack, and they were gone just within a matter of minutes. Couldn't believe it. I just talked to them yesterday or a week ago. I saw them at church, and now they're gone. What do you mean? A car accident? If there's violence involved, like a murder or something like that, a random drive-by shooting, wrong place at the wrong time, that's a lot different than grandma lived to be 96 years old and died in peace in her home or surrounded by loved ones. Those are totally different circumstances. A person who's chronically ill, who has had time to prepare, cancer or you pick the disease. Death by suicide. What about the death of somebody maybe they grew up in Leavenworth, but they lived most of their life somewhere else. Or for those of you with military background, we've lived all over the world. Where do we call home? Where is our final resting place going to be? Because we've traveled for 30 years doing our service. Where is home? So those are all kind of different conditions, and they matter of what the service looks like. Just a real technical term, the difference between a memorial service and a funeral. A funeral has a corpse or a body. A memorial service doesn't. So it's really kind of simple. My first year in ministry, I had to ask that question. I didn't know. I didn't have a clue of any of that kind of stuff. Some people will ask this, is there a difference if there's a body there? Well, what about if, I don't want to be cremated, how's God going to recognize me if I don't have a body? Or what if a person dies and they have had a horrific accident where their body has been disfigured? What about people's like, I don't want to do organ donation because I just don't want to do that. So here's theologically speaking. When you die, your body is just the shell of who you were. If we believe that God created the first human being, Adam, out of the dust of the earth and breathed life into him, don't you think he can do the same thing with your ashes? When you go to heaven, you're going to get a recreated resurrection body. So what it was when you passed away doesn't really matter. And that's personal preference, right? Cremation or corpse, you choose. It's your life. You make those decisions. Death is always sacred, but it's not always dignified. People don't always die in the most dignified way, because that's the nature of death. Death is ugly, and I don't think we ever want to get used to it either. So those are important. There's a financial consideration to the purchase of a casket and cremation. People who haven't experienced death are often shocked at how expensive it is to do the business of death. So I just want to throw that, and I'm not dissing funeral homes or anything like that, but it's just, it costs a lot. It really does. I'm a very frugal person. I've already told my son, why would you buy something that cost $8,000 to be seen for 24 hours? No way. It's like, that's just me. It's like, I'd rather have you have that money, you know, just cremate me and put me in a nice urn, and that's that. So here are some things to consider for your service. And this is where in your handout, what I did was I just made a copy of like the planner sheet that I use when I meet with a family. This is the exact thing I use. So for some of you, it will have way more detail than really what you know or care to know. But I think somewhere in there it'll be useful to you. So one of the first things, who are you working with? A funeral home in town? Are you going home? Like, hey, I'm gonna be buried in wherever home is, and so they're gonna handle the body, or they're gonna do the service. And then, of course, if you're a church person, the church. Your direct point of contact will more than likely be the pastor. So that's just to be aware of. I think when a person dies, if you contact a funeral home and then contact the church in a respectable amount of time, you don't want to lag for a couple days, but you don't have to call them like right away either. An appropriate time. Just a note, I always figure it this way. I, as the pastor, I'm in charge of what happens during the service. That's my authority area, regardless of where it is. So at the cemetery, the service, the funeral, at the church, that's my realm. At the funeral home, what happens? That's the funeral home's place. I go in there and I help serve the family in that space. What happens with the hearse and all of the getting there and getting to, that's their job. And there's a bit of stay in your lane for some of that. And I understand if you're doing a meal at the church, I have no domain over that space right over there. So it's like, just stay away, right? Whatever they say goes. And I don't even want to put my 2 cents in because someone will say, well, the pastor said that. It's like, I didn't say that, seriously. Casket or cremation, that's a choice you'll need to make. Visitation the night before is often nice for people who can't be at the service. They have to work or they just can't make it. They have another something going on. But we would love to come by and pay our respects to the family. We'd like to see you, maybe meet each other and talk to each other. So that's a nice practice to have. Having the visitation like 2 hours on the day of the service, if I can't be there for the funeral, there's a pretty good chance I can't be there 2 hours before the funeral either. I'm just out of town for the day, out of something where I have to be gone. So it's just something to consider. The service itself, where is it going to be? Are you going to have it at the funeral home? Is it at the church? Do you want to do an outside service? Those kinds of factors. Just think those through. Keep in mind the restrictions of where you have the service. Who's going to officiate it? Is it the pastor? Is it a family friend who's a pastor? Is it a family member? I know I've done services where the grandkids have played a pretty significant role in the service. If that's your family, then good. Maybe that isn't your family. You have to decide those things. Who's going to participate as part of the service? Are you going to have a eulogy spoken for you? And will several people do a eulogy? We've had several services where grandchildren have done the eulogy, and they've just been, I'm sitting there just listening almost in awe of like, man, I'd be less like weeping like a baby. And they're just they're funny, they're witty, they're sincere, I just love them. They're so wonderful. I remember having a few family members that have sung or played at a service. And I'm thinking, man, I could never do that. I'd get like to one note in the introduction and I'd be done. I'd just be, well, some of you know me pretty well. I'd be melting like an ice cube. So you got to know who your people are too, right? Scripture. When my mom passed away, my mom died in 2009, I was on the other side of the table. Instead of being the pastor, I was the family member. And so the pastor was asking me all the right questions. Well, did your mom have a favorite scripture? I didn't know. It'd been 20-some years since I'd moved away from the house. And, well, what about favorite songs, music? It's like, I don't know, I know she liked to sing. So you know the lady in our hometown who knew my mom's favorites? The organist at church. She said, oh, when we do him sing, M.A. would love to sing. Precious Lord, take my hand. It's like, all right, check. And the pastor knew that kind of stuff. You know, they checked around, so that's a good thing. You know, for some people, the music's more important than what's said. The kind of songs, the style of songs, who's going to do them? Is it all recorded music? You know, you can have Elvis sing at your funeral if you want. That might be right up your alley. Oh, he's going to. All right. Thought that through already. And that's one of the great things about technology. Always keep in mind that place matters when it comes to those kinds of things, so style. So for example, if a loved one of yours is Catholic, you're probably not going to have Hit the Road Jack as you're leaving the service. I think the priest would give that no, that's not going to happen here kind of thing. Yes?
Just as a point on that,
Sure.
I went to a funeral where the deceased was loved baseball, was a former high school and college baseball coach, and they played Take Me Out to the Ball Game.
There you go. Take Me Out to the Ball Game for a guy who, well, near and dear to my heart. You know, is that appropriate? I think that's one you talk to the pastor, you talk to the family, and everybody's in accord of saying, you know, that really fits. I mean, could we pick a better song than that? That's perfect. It's like that just, who doesn't love that? Everybody who knew the person would know that about them. Of course, it was his favorite song. I totally relate to that. So those are decisions you need to make as family in accord with whoever's leading the service. Just keep that in mind. For those of you who remember, you know, during COVID, we postponed some services and did like a celebration of life like a year later, right? So for Dick Shoemaker's service, Brenda had selected for pre-service music all Motown songs because she said that was Dick's music. And died there. It was a lot different to have Motown music playing a year after he died than 2 days after he died. 2 days after he died, doing the service, I'm not sure that would have been appropriate. It just wouldn't, to me, that wouldn't have felt right. A year later, a lot of that grief has been, you know, you're rolling with it. It's just, and it was fun. There was joy in it, and that's a good thing. 3 days after they pass away, that's pretty raw. So, you know, those are just decisions you have to make. Poems or readings, who will deliver the eulogy, military, cemetery stuff, like are there going to be taps and gun salute and flag presentation? I know here in Leavenworth that's a really important thing. Were they part of Masonic Lodge or, you know, any of the groups that have kind of those types of ceremonies to keep in mind. If you do a cremation, one of the things you might want to talk about as a family is where are we going to scatter the ashes? So I had a family, this is quite a while ago, maybe 15 years ago. They were from Western Kansas, and mom was she was our church mom. She was just a sweet, wonderful lady. And she passed away, and her adult daughter was part of our congregation, and the service was packed. It was like standing room only. And Joyce was cremated, and what Michelle had decided, the adult daughter, was we're going to scatter mom's ashes this summer back in our hometown when we have our family reunion. And I thought, that's a wonderful idea. That way everybody can participate in it. And you can stand around and tell stories and share memories and just all of that. And you know, it's not everybody has a life where they can just drop everything and be halfway across the country in 3 days or 2 days. They just can't do it. But we'll make sure we're at the family reunion, especially for an event like that. When we're scattering grandma's ashes, you better bet we'll be there. We'll just make it work because you have enough time. And then the intentionality of it. And so that's one of those, I was just at a retreat, and the lady who was, one of the ladies who was there had her husband's ashes scattered at the retreat center where we were, because she said for Richard, this was a very special place for him. And that really mattered to her, because those people who come year after year after year to that retreat center were her core community, is what she called it. So kind of like her chosen family. So that makes a difference, yeah. Legality, I'm not sure about all that. I don't know if that's one where you got to have the human shield and kind of just scatter them when nobody's looking. I don't know. That's one of those, check with your local authorities. Yeah, don't get in the police blotter because it's like, what were we doing? What was wrong? Just cop happens to be going by. That's a good question. Haven't thought about that. Yeah.
What I was going to say is that when my father-in-law passed away, my daughter was only 5. So it's very difficult for her to understand why grandpa was gone, and he was gone within 2 weeks. So at the cemetery, I thought I had read that balloons were really good for children. And so we did a balloon release, and I didn't realize how good it was for me. And so anyway, so we had military, because he was Korea, we had military information, and then at the very end, we had a balloon release.
So a balloon release, if you have like really small children, or something like that that's a little more concrete. It's an image of letting go and kind of rising. Again, that has to fit your family, right? Your family, I know families would be like, we would never do that. And other families would go, oh, that's just the best part of the service when we did that. So you got to know who you are and what your family's like, those kinds of things. It's a great gift to your family to leave this kind of information. They don't have to make decisions about what songs or what scripture or where do you want to be buried, or, you've decided those. Just like your advance directives, you've already decided, just follow the plan. It's the same kind of deal for the funeral too. In general practice, and we just have a couple minutes and we can do some Q&A, meeting with the pastor usually if it's a funeral, there's a timeline to it because it needs to be handled within a reasonable time, because you do have a corpse that has to be dealt with. If it's a cremation where you can do it really any time you choose, the urgency isn't quite as strong. I was in summer school one year working on a graduate program, and one of the patriarchs of our church passed away. His name was Harold. And they called and said, well, Dad has passed away. And I said, well, I'm here for a month. It's like you can't just leave and go back and do the service and come back, because it just was. It's all pastors. We'd all just be coming and going because life goes on, right? And I said, I feel so badly, because that's when, you need your pastor. And I knew Harold. Harold was a terrific guy. And they said, we talked about it, which I love that. We talked about it, and we'll just wait till you get back to do Dad's service. And it was like, I'm part of the family, just for that little bit of time. But they could do that because it was cremation. If it would have been we have a body and there has to be a timeliness to that, I would have had to have just handed it off to somebody else, and they would have done well, but I wouldn't have gotten to participate. So those kinds of things. Leave them good plans. And here's my last thought on that before I conclude, and we'll do some questions. Tell your people where your plans are. They're in the red folder in my desk drawer, and then show them the red folder. Someone will go, oh, Dad's desk, that's where all his stuff is. And for those of you who remember Inga Cochran, I know some of you long-timers remember her. So I didn't know her because I was pretty new on board, and she had done her service. She had laid it out, order of worship. I think she took it right out of the hymnal and just put in all the information. She had done that probably 12 to 15 years before I came on board, because the previous pastor, his name was in all of it, right? Pastor Tim. But the plan was still good. So then all I had to do with her the only child, right, Barbara, was say, what of this do you want to keep, and is there anything you'd like to revise or change? And she said, well, it's pretty solid. I would like this song instead of that, but besides that, let's just do what Mom wanted to do. And she had so many decisions to make of all the other things that were swirling. None of that had to be decided on because it was already chosen. So I thought that was a wonderful gift that her mom gave to her and the rest of her family. So we have some time for Q&A. I'm sure Marcia will tell me when it's... This is the one time you got to tell the pastor, that's enough.
Oh, no.
Questions, thoughts? Ready to take a break? Jimmy thinks I'm doing very well. I'm going to stick around for a while. All right. 2 times on Sunday. So tip your waiters. Sure.
And maybe there's not a good answer. When somebody gets married, it's traditional to tip the preacher and maybe pay a fee for
Yeah.
the church. Do you do that when people die?
If you work through a funeral home, that's usually just part of the payment schedule. And it's just a set fee. They just fold it in. So if you don't work through a funeral home, it's like we're taking care of all the arrangement. It usually is. It's an acknowledgement of the time that's invested in it more than anything else. Would a pastor probably do it for nothing? Yeah, they probably. I would think they would. It's the same way with like people who play. It's like, well, we have somebody to play the organ, or we have a musician come and play. That we've invited them to do it. I think you acknowledge their expertise, their skill, and also the time invested. I know people that will sign the check and just say, I'm doing it out of, this is my gift to you. But I always figure, let them decide that. You know, maybe they need the money, or maybe they're saving for something that you have no idea about. So, yeah, it's appropriate to do that. And usually it's local custom of how much and that kind of thing. Jan, please. So the question was, does the VA have any of this kind of stuff available if that fits your, and Liz will talk a little bit more to that in just a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Share one more thing. My mother-in-law passed away on the 22nd of December. We don't even remember that Christmas. You know, so something like this would have been wonderful. So that's what I was going to say, is just this would have been a fantastic tool to have for her. I remember digging through her room, looking for things. We stayed up till 2 or 3 in the morning trying to find this, that, and the other, because she did not have it in a certain spot, and it was extremely stressful.
So when someone passes away, and for those of you who have had people pass away, you understand that fog of grief is just, I can't think of anything. My concentration level is just terrible. And you just really struggle to even just think well. And it's the holidays, because her mother-in-law was like the 22nd of December. And just what a gift it would have been. It's like, oh yeah, Mom's folder. She kept it in the drawer right next to her Bible. And she told us, every time we saw her, she told us that. And so you don't have to comb through her Bible going, I wonder if Mom had a favorite passage, you know, and you're flipping through it hoping to just get lucky. It's already thought through. If you have other questions.
Okay, our next speaker, Liz Brown, is a social worker here in Leavenworth. Her specialty is geriatrics and end of life. So we'll just turn it over to her.
Thank you, Marcia. I just want to say thank you to our church for putting this on and for asking me to be a part of this. I know a lot of you in the room. My name's Liz Brown. I'm a social worker. I do currently work for the VA, so I'll be sharing some of that information towards the end. But most of my experience is in geriatrics and hospice care. So much like Mike, whose work often, unfortunately, centers around what happens when things don't go well and we haven't prepared. Most people don't need a social worker if things have gone really well and we've been prepared, right? So I have a lot of stories about what happens when things have gone awry, and I'll try not to share too many of those with you today. Many of you may know me as Aaron and Wyatt's mom. As moms, we get that title right. And some of you know me as Bob and Katie Franzen's daughter. And so I have had the unfortunate experience of very suddenly and unexpectedly planning things when someone has died. My dad was unfortunately killed in a car accident when he was 55 years old. So I can attest that if you've had some of these conversations ahead of time, especially about funeral, what a gift that is to your family. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about how to prepare your families for some of these topics, because we've talked a lot about task-centered, functional things that we need to do today, right? There's paperwork stuff that needs to be done. But you knew that as a social worker, I was going to talk to you about your feelings. we love to talk about our feelings, right? If we do all the functional stuff, but we haven't had the important conversations with the people that are going to be involved in some of this process, you would be amazed at how things won't happen the way you wanted them to. And that's when people like me get involved with your families and get in the middle of conflict. So first, I'm going to start with just a really brief video from a resource called the Conversation Project. So this is a website that's available to you. It has so many resources to help you facilitate these conversations in your families and your faith communities. I'll show you some of those resources. It's totally free. I don't work for these people, but it's a really great resource. theconversationproject.org is where I'm going to get this video from. So, Stephen.
Finally tonight, ABC News.
So we've talked about the importance of a few key topics, and I want to just build on those a little bit, and I'll leave some time for questions as well. So when we talk about who's going to be there at the end and who's going to make decisions for me if I can't make them for myself anymore, it's really critical that you've thought about who's the right person. You can appoint anyone that you trust to be your durable power of attorney for healthcare decisions, but have you had that conversation with those people? You'll notice on durable power of attorney for healthcare forms, there's no place for that person to sign. And so as a social worker in the hospital, I've had the really fun experience of calling someone to let them know that, Mr. Jones is in the hospital and we need for your assistance. You're named as his healthcare power of attorney, and it's time to start making some decisions. And the person on the other end of the phone had no idea that they were put in that position. So that's why I say the paperwork's important, and so is the conversation. You may be appointing someone who knows they've been appointed to make decisions for you, but they have very different values and very different ideas on some of these topics. And so before we start filling out paperwork, we want to make sure to have a meaningful conversation about what matters most to you if you were at a life-limiting or life-ending diagnosis. And so having those conversations is just as critical as the paperwork. And the conversationproject.org has a conversation starter guide, and it asks some really thoughtful questions that you may not think of on your own, and they can kind of spur the conversation. So I have an advance directive, I have a durable power of attorney for healthcare, and I have a living will. Full disclosure, will be 44 this month. As far as I know, I'm in good health, but I'm not a magical unicorn. And so life can happen to me just like it happens to anybody else. This information is important for adults of all ages. My 21-year-old son has a durable power of attorney document, and it names me. Because if something serious happened, I can't just swoop in so easily anymore as mom and take care of things. So this has nothing to do with your age, and it has nothing to do with your health status. This is about being prepared, okay? So I want to share a couple of resources that I have for you as well. Some of these will apply to you, some may not. I'm going to hang back as long as people need me to afterwards. When you're having these conversations, when you go home from here and you do your homework and you're talking to the people in your life about some of these decisions, you can say that you attended this session and this social worker told you that you had to. So that's a really good way to start the conversation, is to blame me for an uncomfortable conversation, because I'd rather you have it now than to wait. So first and foremost, durable power of attorney for healthcare decisions. I brought with me a basic form that's accepted at all of our hospital systems. It has a power of attorney, and it also has a healthcare treatment directive on the back. I have a bunch of copies, and you can take a look at those before you leave here. Obviously, if you're doing any in-depth estate planning, my guess is that any reputable attorney, such as Mike Crow, is going to include that as part of that process. Please don't delay, but also, if you want to look at those forms, I have one with me. I also have with me what's called a TPOP form. That's a transportable physician order of patient preferences. This is basically a DNR form, but it goes across state lines and it travels with you, whether in your home, in an ambulance, in a hospital. And if you want to take a look at one of those forms and talk it over with your physician, I highly recommend that you do that. We often don't talk about CPR outcomes for folks based on age and health status. Only your physician can do that. I encourage you to force them into an uncomfortable conversation. It's called we call it a TPOP because you know how we love acronyms, especially, I work for the federal government. We love an acronym. It's a transportable physician order for patient preferences. What I like about this form is that it gives some nuance, so it doesn't just ask you black or white, CPR, yes or no. It has some nuance included about, well, maybe in some situations, or maybe how do I feel about comfort measures, things like that. I'll let you look that over and review it with your physician. But as Mike was explaining, if we have not completed a DNR form, if you want to be a do not resuscitate, which means you want to allow a natural process to take place at the time of your death. If you want that to happen, you have to have a form that is signed by your physician in your home or wherever you're living. You may go to the hospital and you tell the doctor while you're in the hospital, I wouldn't want CPR if my heart stops. That order by that doctor only applies to that time while you're in that hospital. You need to have a form like this that travels with you. Or when 911 is called, by law, emergency responders will come to your home and they will be required to do absolutely everything they can to restart your heart. Some of you know my husband is a police officer, and he has had to do CPR on people that there was no business doing CPR on those people. But it's because they had a living will that said their preferences. Your living will is a declaration of what you want to have happen. But by law, when emergency responders get there, they're not going to dig through your legal paperwork or your living will necessarily. They want to look for this form signed by a doctor. It's an order, okay? So this is a really important part of the process. My living will says that Liz Brown, age 44, in my current health, I would want you to try life-sustaining treatments for me for a time. I believe I could sustain CPR. I could sustain a trial of being on a mechanical ventilator. That's me at my age and my health status. When I'm 90, you better not. You better not. And I will have a DNR at that time, okay? Go ahead.
What do you mean? You have to take that in your purse everywhere?
Thank you for asking. So, I dropped my pen. It's my favorite pen. I don't want to lose it. So it travels with you, meaning that when you're in the hospital, you might have a DNR order on file at the hospital for that episode of hospitalization. But say you live in an assisted living facility, and there is some type of transport that's going to take you from the hospital to your assisted living facility. What happens when your heart stops and you're in transit? Are you a DNR? Not unless you have a form like this signed by a doctor. When you get home, I've worked with people in hospice at the very end of their life, and they did not have a DNR form. And so therefore, we would have to do CPR on someone who technically is admitted to hospice care. Fun fact, you can be admitted to hospice and be what we call a full code. That is your right as the patient to make that decision. I would personally say that's not advisable. But when people haven't prepared, we haven't had these conversations, and now your daughter has to make that decision. I've seen family members struggle and insist that we do everything for mom. I know she's on hospice, but when her heart stops, we have to try. And so then we're doing CPR on a 97-year-old, 100-pound lady. Please don't let that happen to people that you care about. Go ahead, Dr. McAllister.
So assuming that you're interested in being an organ donor and you're willing to go on life support long enough for them to harvest your kidneys, do you talk to a social worker about how to do the paperwork so that that's possible?
Absolutely. And as Mike said, the living will form that he included in your packet is a very sufficient document, but you can also attach additional pages as long as they're, appropriately signed and witnessed along with that original page that gives nuance to your circumstances. And so you can include information about organ donation. You may also include in your living will information about cultural, spiritual, religious, faith-based values that could impact your medical treatment. So your living will documents can be really basic or they can be really individualized. And you can work with an attorney to assist you with those things. In the hospital, I assist people with that every day. It's my full-time job, so that's absolutely something that's an option available. Go ahead.
You checked off the organ donor thing on your driver's license. How does that work?
Yeah. So if you're in a circumstance, most often this is how this is going to happen. I'll just bring it down to brass tacks. Organ donation typically is an option when you're in a hospital setting and we know you're preparing for end of life and decisions are being made about withdrawing life-sustaining treatments like mechanical ventilation, tube feedings, et cetera. And so the medical team is going to talk with your family about organ donation. And so any documentation you've done to give them that guidance about what you would or wouldn't want is very helpful. Also have these conversations ahead of time. I also regularly have folks ask me about, could I donate my body to science? Has anybody here ever wondered about that? I've had a family member to do that. That is something that you also need to make arrangements for ahead of time. KU has what they call their willed body program, and you can elect to do that. There is some paperwork you would need to do ahead of time, and if people have individual questions about that, I can talk with you about it after. Keep in mind that if you are doing body donation of any kind, you need to have a backup plan because at the time of your passing, the university can elect to decline your anatomical gift at that time if they don't need it. So you always want a backup plan. Sorry, I didn't mean to get so into the weeds about things, but I could talk about this all day, honestly. And the reason that I talk about this, and I talk about it at length with people, is because I'm also, as Mike mentioned, on the ethics board for the VA healthcare system in this lovely area of our country. And most of our consults or our complex cases that we get are cases where there is conflict around these exact issues. Maybe dad had a living will, but now his 2 adult kids are in conflict about whether they want to follow that living will. And so we have to get involved in that because dad filled out the paperwork and never had the conversation to make things real clear. So I can't emphasize that enough. And when you're thinking about who you want to entrust these decisions to, what character traits are you looking for in that person? Who's going to be there? Who's going to make those hard calls for you? This is not a rhetorical question. What character traits are you looking for? Shout them out. Honesty. Character. What was that? Wisdom. Empathy. What was that? Being brave. Yeah. Compassion. Yeah. Pragmatic. Okay. Methodical. Available. Yeah. There's another good one. Y'all don't pick your 18-year-old grandson who never answers the phone, please. Yeah, exactly. Think about the character traits. I also want you to think about who here has 2 or more children in your family? Okay, 3 or more, 4 or more, 5 or more? Okay. Don't name all your children as your decision makers, please. I think people oftentimes think about, when I'm naming my power of attorney, I don't want any of my kids to feel left out or feel like I didn't trust them enough. And ultimately, when you name all 5 of your kids as a durable power of attorney for healthcare, I now, as the social worker, having never met them before, have to get 5 people in a very emotionally stressful time to all agree on a really hard call. It's not likely that that's going to be an easy process, and we're trying to avoid conflict, guilt, fighting at end of life, right? And so please don't name all 5 of your kids. What I always tell folks is, all of your kids can be involved in the conversation. Everybody can be in the room and be a part of the talk, but we need you to appoint 1 or 2 hopefully, because you always should have a backup, who are going to be that decision maker, okay? So think about who's the right person, and it needs to be somebody who can make a hard decision, somebody who knows my values, someone who can use what we call substituted judgment, which means you're not going to make the decisions. I need my healthcare decision maker to make the decisions in accordance with what I would want and my values, not necessarily how they would feel for themselves. They need to use substituted judgment in that situation, okay? We do have power of attorneys for healthcare. We do have those decision makers routinely attempt to override your decisions in the hospital. And it's not because they don't care about you. It's not because they're being disrespectful. It's because they love you, and it's really hard. So think about that ahead of time. Who's going to be able to make the hard decisions, and also who is going to be available for when that moment comes. Does anybody have any questions? Thank you, Marcia. They do not have to be physically present. Sometimes I hear people say, well, I want to name my daughter. She's a nurse. She's really capable. She's really in line with my values. She knows what I want, but she lives in Maryland. I don't care. We'll call her on the phone. We do virtual video conferencing in with the physicians. The most important thing is pick the person you think is best. I've had to use the Red Cross to contact a service member who's deployed. If I can do that, I can call your daughter in Maryland, okay? Pick the person you think is best. Their physical location does not matter. They do not have to be related to you by blood or by law. Good question. Thank you. So when should you complete a power of attorney for healthcare decisions or a living will? Yesterday. Yesterday. Did you drive here today? Yesterday. Oftentimes I get referrals from physicians, from primary physicians that say, hey, I've got this patient and his family really needs a power of attorney. He's got such severe dementia. I can't help you. It's too late. You have to have the capacity to make those decisions for yourself. So please do not wait until an event has occurred or a disease has progressed so far that now I ethically cannot allow you to sign anything for yourself. Now we're going to go to court. Go ahead. Do they time out? Great question. So your power of attorney for healthcare decisions and your living will are valid until you take steps to tell us otherwise. You can revoke them or change them anytime that you want to, but you need to make sure that they stay up to date along the years, because whatever document is the document that we have, that's the document we have. So they don't expire, but you can change them anytime you want to. Good question. Did I answer that question? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, sir. The T-pop? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sure. So he was asking about the difference between the old sort of, it was like a pink-looking form that has, are you talking about that, like the outside the hospital DNR form? Yeah. So this form includes information about CPR, but it also gives you the option to say, I want you to attempt CPR or do not attempt CPR, and then also additional treatment orders that can say, I want full CPR, full everything. Or you can say selective treatments, and that could be positive airway pressure, antibiotics, IV fluids. It also gives the option to say, I want comfort-focused treatments, so pain medications, anything to keep me comfortable, I do want you to utilize those. So there's more individualizing the document. It's not just about CPR, because there are a lot of other, as Mike was saying, medical technology has advanced. We can keep you alive for so long. And CPR is just one of those interventions. Good question. Jan? Absolutely. I recommend that on your documents, like a TPOP form, a durable power of attorney, a living will, those documents, it's really important, as Dave was saying, to have things like that and your funeral planning, all that in a location where people can easily access them, and information about allergies, adverse reactions, and your medication list. It's really good to keep all that together, because when the ambulance comes to your house, if they can grab it all and take it to the hospital, it's extremely beneficial. Good question. Go ahead.
You can put it on your refrigerator.
Yes. Yes. Most people will keep if they have a DNR form, they will keep this on their refrigerator. Emergency responders know to look on your refrigerator. I've talked to people that say, I'd really, when my grandkids come over and grab a Twinkie from the freezer, I'd really rather them not see my DNR on the fridge. Understandable, right? Keep it in a plastic sleeve in your freezer. And emergency responders, there's just this unknown rule that we look in your freezer. Mm-hmm. Got a question? Red file. Excellent, yes. So the Council on Aging has what they call the Red File Project, and it's kind of a transparent red file, and it's magnetized, so it sticks to your fridge, and you can put things in it like advanced directives, a DNR, your medication list, all of that, and stick it to your fridge. Yeah.
Where do you get that form?
The TPOP form, I have a whole stack of them. I'm happy to hand them out like candy. What a fun thing, right? Yes. Also, Marcia asked me to mention that I'm also a notary, so I do help people with these documents every day, and so I'm also a notary. Other resources that I'm going to have at the end that might not apply to everybody in the room, but I have a feeling quite a number. I have resources from the VA about application for burial in a national cemetery and what we call memorial products. And also information about applying for VA survivor benefits as well. So I'll have those with me afterwards, as well as the power of attorney and healthcare treatment directive forms, the basic forms that most of our hospitals use. And I also have a booklet here that's about setting healthcare goals. And I have a whole stack of them. I encourage you to take a look at one if you want to take one with you. It asks about the benefits and risks of lots of these treatments we're talking about: mechanical ventilation, CPR, tube feedings, dialysis. I know we have a lot of medical folks in the room with medical background, but some people don't have that. And so we might not even understand what some of these treatments mean. And what happens if I say yes to a feeding tube? What happens if I say no to a feeding tube? Those kinds of difficult questions, we've got that information in these books. It is from the VA. I'm not here on official business, but this is such a great resource for anybody, so I brought a whole bunch. Question, Kristen?
Yeah, is there a way to set it with a lot of these documents that you have a primary person and then a secondary rather
Yes.
than two people who are making a decision together?
Yes, good question. So Kristen asked, is there a way to set this so that you have a primary decision maker and then an alternate so that we don't have two people making the decision together? Yes. So I have a primary healthcare decision maker, and then I also have a backup. And my backup is only called upon or given that authority if my primary person is unavailable or refuses to participate. We have that happen sometimes. We think somebody's going to be able to make those tough calls, and then when the moment arrives, they are uncomfortable, and they always have the legal right to refuse. So you can name somebody, it doesn't obligate them legally to actually follow through. So a backup is important. If you're naming anyone that lives with you, if you're naming a spouse, really important to think of a backup. I have my husband as my primary decision maker, and we tend to be in a car together a lot. On a motorcycle. Sometimes I let him fly me in a plane. If something's happened to me, he might be banged up too, and we saw this a lot during COVID. Spouses or people who live in the same household all got really, really sick together, right? And so an alternate is important. Question?
I always worry about this. I gave it to the Providence because I was having surgery on there, but when I talked to St. John's, they asked, oh, we can find it. Should I give it to St. John's?
Good question. What do you do with these documents once you've completed them? So Providence and St. John, she mentioned like, oh, if it's on file with Providence, is it on file with St. John? They're technically owned by the same healthcare system, so their medical records talk to one another, but that's not the case with all hospital systems. So your advance directives are going to be good in any hospital setting, but how are they going to know you have one? You put one on file if that's a place where you regularly get your health care, or you make sure that people in your life in an emergency have quick access to the documents. So when I do advance directive documents with people, you keep your original and we make extras. Put a copy on file at your local hospital if you're most likely to be taken there in an emergency. If your daughter's your decision maker, give her a copy of the documents so that she can get it easily when she gets that call and has to run out the door. Okay, so make sure people have copies of these documents if needed. Go ahead.
They told me to put it in the glove compartment.
Yeah, some people keep a copy in the glove box of their car.
That's what they said.
Yeah.
That's one place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Other questions? Go ahead. Yes, and we will accept electronic copies of those documents, and most of the time those sticky situations only get sticky when people in the family are fighting. So, thanks for asking. I've had people say, oh, well, you know, the doctors are just gonna wanna pull the plug on me so fast. You know, that's what they're gonna wanna do. They're gonna wanna free up that bed. They're gonna wanna free up that ventilator, right? Right? Have you known a doctor? All due respect to the physicians in the room, but most of the doctors I've worked with want to believe that they can fix it and they can make it better, and they'll try everything. So it's usually the opposite. It's usually your friendly neighborhood social worker who has to come in and say, hey, maybe we want to take a time out. Yeah. Yeah. Your doctor's not going to be quick to pull the plug. That's not going to be the person. Yeah. Yeah, we'll try everything. I have so many stories I could share with you about situations like that. I'll share one. So I had a patient who I was working in a long-term care setting, and this is many years ago, but this patient was incapacitated, unable to engage with his environment in any way, unable to communicate, and unable to have any voluntary movement, couldn't even like reposition himself in the bed. It didn't appear that he had any ability to engage cognitively with his surroundings, and his body could breathe on its own. He didn't need a ventilator. Those basic functions of your brain can keep your body alive a long, long time. But he couldn't safely eat or drink by mouth, right? Because if you can't wake up and talk to us, it's not safe for us to feed you by mouth. You'll choke. So inevitably, we have to have conversations about feeding tubes. And he lived in a bed, fed through a tube, with his diapers changed for many years. And he had one family member who would come to see him very occasionally. and he also had a significant source of income. And that money was continuing to be deposited in his bank account every month. And because of his veteran status, he had a certain level of eligibility. This doesn't apply to all veterans, but he had a certain level of eligibility that said his long-term care bill was paid by the VA. And so all of his money was still his to keep, and all of his monthly income was still his coming into that bank account. Who do you think had access to that bank account? Oh, the family member who visited occasionally, and ultimately was the person who got to decide how long do we stay alive on a tube feed in a bed, unconscious. Now, here's what I'll tell you. From my standpoint, and this is because of my personal values, I said, oh my gosh, when I got hired and I was working there, I thought, does this man want to be kept alive this way? Would he want this? We had no direction, no documents, no evidence to say that he'd ever talked about these things, certainly never written anything down. Okay, so his decision maker was his next of kin, which was this family member. And I personally had a values conflict with what was going on here, right? Like, it's very uncomfortable. And then I had other people who came from a different background than I did, culturally, different socioeconomic background, who weighed in and said, maybe this guy would be okay with this. Maybe this patient would be okay with this because he knows that every month that he is surviving, he is helping to provide for his family, right? Maybe there are nieces and nephews, maybe there are grandkids that we don't know about that are being financially supported by this income, and he felt that if that's the least he could do, and that was his purpose, was to help financially provide for his family, maybe he would be okay with that. That was a value of their family. Maybe they had a family that had grown up in poverty, and this person had been the financial backbone and supporter of their family, and that was important to him. Could be, right? I hadn't thought about it that way. Sure would have been nice if I had anything from the patient indicating that, because then I would have felt a little bit more comfortable, but ultimately it's not about my comfort, right? It's about that patient, their dignity, their values, what matters most to them. The only way we can know that is if you let anyone know that in advance, and please document it. So what happened? Yeah. There's I'll just be honest, I won't go into details because not everybody here's medical and comfortable with those things, but medically there are some really unfortunate things that can happen with a human body when you leave it in a bed that long. Okay. Yeah. I've had the opportunity to be with people in the very final moments of their life, and many people as they took their last breath, and I've seen things happen in a very dignified and peaceful and loving way when family is prepared and conversations have happened ahead of time. And I've also been in households where people are actively in conflict and stress and such duress in that moment because we haven't talked about it. Often when topics are uncomfortable, and maybe they may make us want to cry or feel afraid, our brains want to protect us from those negative emotions because it says danger, and so we back away from those topics. We're protecting ourselves, right? Our brain says danger when we feel stress, fear, anxiety, worry, guilt, what we call anticipatory grief, meaning I'm already starting to grieve, I'm afraid of what's coming. Right? So we pull away, and I urge you to lean in those difficult emotions and not to back down from seeing when you bring these topics up with your loved ones, you may be well prepared to have these conversations and feel like, I'm okay with having this talk now. I'm at a place in my life. I've had a good life. I know what I want, what I don't want. I'm ready for the conversation. And then you see someone you love start to cry because you bring up the topic. Has anybody had that happen? Okay, some raised hands. I'm ready to have the conversation, but they are not. Allow people to have their hard emotions and to cry and to feel some anxiety about these topics. It's because they love you, but it doesn't mean that the conversation doesn't still need to happen. And so blame your friendly neighborhood social worker who said, hey, we've got to have this conversation. Use the resources from the conversationproject.org. They have literal conversation starter guides if you have a hard time finding the words. Any other questions? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Kate, do you know anything about the difference between hospice and palliative?
Hospice and palliative care. Thanks, Marcia. You're like a plant. We didn't plant her there, but she's so good at this. Yes. So palliative care is a term that's used in hospital settings to acknowledge that somebody has potentially a terminal or life-limiting illness, and they need additional support to help them live the best quality of life that they can, while they may also still be receiving active and curative treatments. That's palliative care. Hospice care says we're no longer pursuing curative treatments for whatever is going on, and we've decided to focus on comfort. And so we're no longer pursuing active treatment for things. We are going to focus over here on comfort. And a physician has to state that if your disease process were to run its normal expected course, you would have 6 months or less. That's hospice. Hospice is not a place or a company. It's a type of service. It's covered 100% by all insurance, including Medicare, and there's no out-of-pocket expense to you or your family. Hospice service can be provided in a nursing home setting, an assisted living, in your home. So hospice is a type of care that focuses on comfort and dignity and preparing you for your death. But it's not a place or a certain company. There are lots of companies that provide that type of care. I think there's like 80-something in the Kansas City area, so there's a lot of options. But hospice covers things like durable medical equipment. Do you need a hospital bed in your house? That is covered by hospice. What about a bedside commode, a special kind of lift to help you get in and out of bed? Any medications related to your comfort? Medications for pain to help you with breathing easier? Do you need oxygen for comfort? Hospice provides oxygen, not a mechanical ventilator breathing for your body, but supplemental oxygen, sure. Incontinence supplies, which can be really expensive at end of life. All of these are covered at 100%. There's no out-of-pocket expense, and hospice should not be for your last 3 days. I've taken care of patients that I met yesterday. They don't have much of a relationship with me, right? They don't even know who's there taking care of them. I don't have a relationship with the family built up yet when there is like extreme moment of crisis. If I could have met you several months ago, we could have built up a trusting relationship. The whole experience is different. Hospice early, I say. It's a wonderful service. Thank you for asking. Debbie.
But when Jim was on hospice, we were told, once you're on hospice, you may not call 911.
Correct.
To call.
Right. Medicare is going to pay for hospice or the hospital, not both. So that's a Medicare coverage issue. Hospice is when you've decided you're not going to the hospital and seeking aggressive treatment anymore. And so you have to be prepared to make that transition from calling 911 every time it seems like mom's breathing's getting weird, we need to call 911. No, you don't. You have hospice. Call your hospice company. They're supposed to come to your home and help you there. Go ahead.
What happens, my father-in-law ended up being on, it's not going to happen today, but ended up being on hospice for 3 years because it just worked out that way. But what happens if you live past the 6 months and they were wrong?
So if you live past the 6 months and they were wrong, happens. You can be recertified for hospice as long as they can document to your insurance a progressive decline of your disease. Then you can be recertified. So I worked with people on hospice for longer than 6 months. Also, sometimes people graduate. People do, they graduate from hospice. That happens. They stabilize. Sometimes when you bring in a whole interdisciplinary care team of supportive people, you get better, right? What a wonderful thing. We graduate them, and then if they need us again, we come on back. Yeah, that happens. Good question. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions? Okay. I appreciate everyone's time. I'm going to hang back. Oh, Ms. Janglick, yes.
My question before was, does the VA
Yes. So if you are a veteran, or if your loved one is a veteran, all veterans that receive care at the VA have a social worker assigned to them. You might not know that. You can't, I was almost going to say, you can't swing a dead cat at the VA without hitting a social worker. We're everywhere. Sorry. I don't know where that saying comes from. So there's a lot of social workers. Every primary care provider and specialty provider, doctors, nurse practitioners at the VA have a social worker assigned to their team. And so if you don't know who that person is, if you get your care in Leavenworth, then you can go to the C1 hallway at the Leavenworth VA. Down the hall where there's eligibility, release of information offices. It's on the emergency room side of the hospital. We've got social worker offices lined up. Just walk into any one of them, and we'll be happy to connect you with your social worker and talk about how to facilitate all of these things in terms of like VA side of the house. Go ahead, Jan. Miss Jan Glick has known me since I was, I think, yeah, in the 6th grade. So you can ask me all the questions you want.
Would they put on some sort of seminar like this for people who don't use the VA regularly, but so that we know who to call, whatever?
Sure. So I should organize that? Okay. Excellent. Excellent idea. Yes, I love it. Yeah, I think the VA side of things can be overwhelming, and so I have some basic information and resources for folks today, but ultimately I agree there's opportunities for us there, right? As the spouse of a deceased veteran, you can come see us anytime, and we'll be happy to talk with you. Yeah. There's a lot of information that veterans and their spouses don't know about their burial benefits, all kinds of stuff like that, and we'll be happy to help. Go ahead, sir.
As a veteran, can you pick out your plot out of the veterans?
You cannot pick out your plot, like your specific place, but that is a benefit that's available to you. Veterans can be buried or cremated and have their ashes buried or placed in a columbarium, like a big memorial wall. And you don't necessarily pick out your particular real estate ahead of time. We probably wouldn't have picked out the real estate my dad got assigned, frankly, but it's beautiful. It's beautiful up there, but we really got to walk up a hill. Katie's going to have to stay in good shape to keep walking up that hill, she always says. So you don't necessarily pick out the specific spot, but you do have a place there for you and your spouse. A lot of people don't know spouses can be buried with you. Also, certain situations for dependent children also. And I have a bunch of information about that too. But, yeah. Make sure you know where your DD-214 is. If you don't know where your DD-214 is, come see me. We need to talk about it. All right. Okay, I've taken up a lot of your time. Thank you so much. I'll be around afterwards for questions.